X-Talks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This life science focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to keep you up to date.
Hello and welcome to the X-Talks Life Science Podcast. I'm Aisha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at xtalks.com, and this week I'm delighted to introduce a very special guest on the show. Today we have with us Dr. Genevieve Neal-Perry, MD, PhD, who is a professor and chair at UNC School of Medicine, Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And she's also lead investigator on a study investigating Veozah, or fezolinetant, which is a drug developed by Astellas Pharma that received FDA approval in May this year for the treatment of moderate to severe vasomotor symptoms, or VMS, due to menopause. It's the first non-hormonal neurokinin 3 or NK3 receptor antagonist approved to treat vasomotor symptoms, which include hot flashes and night sweats, among other symptoms that are associated with menopause. It's estimated that about 60 to 80% of women experience vasomotor symptoms during or after the menopausal transition, and this can have a significant impact on daily activities and overall quality of life. Dr. Neal-Perry will speak to us about some of the work that was presented at the annual meeting of the Menopause Society on fezolinetant, and this includes some of the latest clinical data looking at the effect of the drug on moderate to severe vasomotor symptoms in subgroups based on hormone therapy history from pooled data from 2 randomized phase 3 studies, as well as safety data over a period of 52 weeks as well. So without further ado, to learn more about the latest trial data for fezolinetant, let's turn to Dr. Neal-Perry. Welcome to the show, Dr. Neal-Perry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. And so I'd like to start off by asking what exactly, I did mention some of the vasomotor symptoms or VMS that are associated with menopause, but what exactly are they and how do these symptoms really impact the quality of life for menopausal women?
Thanks, Alicia. That's a great question. Vasomotor symptoms are essentially the sensation of feeling hot, and it's typically from the chest up, and you just have this very just random sensation of feeling hot, sweating. Can be disruptive to your sleep at night, so that people can feel tired. Often people affected may complain of brain fog because they're tired and not able to think as clearly, as well as it can be just disruptive when you're going about your daily activities, particularly as a professional. If all of a sudden you're feeling hot and you're sweating and you're needing to remove layers of clothing.
And so that definitely has an impact on the quality of life. And so could you tell us how a drug like fezolinetant works as a non-hormonal therapy and why its FDA approval was so pivotal?
Yeah, for many years, we've known for many years that people who have the menopause or the menopausal transition experience vasomotor symptoms, and that these vasomotor symptoms are very disruptive to quality of life. But we didn't really understand what caused them. We knew that it was related to the loss of hormonal, particularly estrogen in women, and we knew that estrogen could help reduce them, but we didn't really understand why. And what's so exciting about fezolinetant is that it actually treats the cells that cause the hot flashes. So it's selective, unlike estrogen, and because estrogen works pretty much everywhere. Estrogen receptors are throughout the entire body, whereas the neurons, which are called candy neurons, are special neurons because they're responsive to estrogen, but they also respond to fezolinetant. And so the way these neurons work is that typically under estrogen, like an estrogen environment, an estrogen enriched environment like what we have when you're premenopausal, these neurons are pretty quiet. They're not very active. if the ovaries are removed or you have a natural menopause, that withdraws the estrogen. And what happens to these neurons is they become very active. They become hyperactive, and they release some biochemical agent called neurokinin. And this neurokinin will activate the neuron itself, but also activate the neurons located in the brain region that cause hot flashes. And so that's what we learned. We've learned this over the past decade with work done by myself and Naomi Rance and others, that these neurons are really critical to hot flashes. So what's so unique about fezolinetant is that this fezolinetant is what's called an NK3 receptor antagonist, which is neurokinin 3 receptor. And these neurons are located on the candy neurons, and they're located on the neurons that cause hot flashes. So it's a very specific treatment for hot flashes. And as a result, we don't worry about breast cancer. We don't worry about needing progesterone to prevent cancer of the uterus, and some of the things that you may be concerned about with using hormones. You don't have those same concerns with the fezolinetant.
And so speaking of hormonal therapy, I know that you have looked at the use of fezolinetant on vasomotor symptoms in subgroups that have a history of being on hormonal therapy. So could you tell us a bit about some of the results and what you've seen in that kind of a group of patients?
Yeah, so first of all, estrogen, which is the hormone we're talking about, is an effective drug for hot flashes. But not everyone can use estrogen, and not everyone wants to use estrogen. So having an effective non-hormonal option was really important for women and people who are affected by hot flashes. The fezolinetant ability to reduce hot flashes in people who can't use estrogen or who used estrogen in the past was a question for us. And what we did was we were able to look at subgroups, people who are naive to estrogen, people who have used estrogen, to see whether they're equally responsive to fezolinetant. And what we were able to show is that for people who had never used estrogen versus people who have used estrogen, that fezolinetant was equally effective. That was also, yeah, I'm sorry. That was also true for people who were adverse to estrogen, or people who were not suitable for estrogen because they may have a medical problem that does not allow them to use it.
Right. And so definitely there was, an unmet need in this space where there was a great need for non-hormonal options that are targeted. Because I know that there are some other drugs, antidepressants even, and things like that are used for the treatment of symptoms associated with menopause. So I think this is really groundbreaking indeed.
Yeah, indeed. And you're right. There are disorders where you cannot use estrogen as part of the treatment. People who have cancer, who have a diagnosis of a hormone responsive cancer, can't give them estrogen. People who have blood clotting disorders, they're not eligible for estrogen. People who may be obese with diabetes, they're not great candidates for estrogen. And all the obese individuals, people who can't use estrogen for one reason or another, were all equally responsive to fezolinetant. So it's definitely great to have options for people. And for many years we didn't have effective options. You mentioned some of the antidepressants. They work, but they don't always work in everyone. And they can certainly have some side effects that people don't prefer. And similar to estrogen, there are people who are averse to using an antidepressant if they don't have a diagnosis of depression. It's hard to kind of wrap your head around, why do I need to use this?
Right.
The case. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's definitely, again, very pivotal here. And so really exciting to learn more about it. And also, I know that as part of some of the presentations at the recent annual meeting of the Menopause Society, you also had some data on taking a look at the efficacy of fezolinetant according to time of day, and also some safety data over a 1 year period. So could you speak to us about all of that
Yeah,
data as well?
I sure can. So one question that we had several questions that were addressed at the NAMS meeting this past fall. One was about individuals who were naive or not able to take estrogen, were they responsive? And then another question that often came up was, is it as effective during the day as it is at night? So if you take a dose in the morning, does it still work at night? And so we actually did that study. We looked at the responsiveness of individuals who are impacted with moderate to severe hot flashes. So on average, they had like 10 to 11 hot flashes. And we looked at whether it was reduced during the day compared to placebo. And placebo basically is you take a pill that's not the medication, but people don't know which one is which. And this way you're not biasing people's perception. And we also looked at individuals who are having hot flashes at night compared to placebo. Was it effective? And it was very effective, both during the day as well as during the night. And it was most effective with the dose that we actually have available for the treatment of hot flashes, which is a 45 milligram dose. Your other question about safety.
Yeah.
So there are several things that we looked at with regard to safety. One was whether or not there was bleeding associated with it, because there were concerns around with hormones about risk for cancer, and we looked at that. And there was no signal for cancer. We also looked at a whole host of things, and the most common thing that we saw was headache and COVID. So most of the studies were done during the COVID window,
Right.
and so
Makes sense.
not surprised.
Right.
With a previous NK receptor antagonists that have been studied, and they were trying to move into phase 3, one of the key issues with it was that it caused elevated liver enzymes. And so there was concern that it actually caused liver damage. And so we were very focused on that, because obviously we don't want to cause harm. We want to improve quality of life without any adverse effects. And so we looked at the liver enzymes, and we did not see a difference between our placebo group and our treatment group in terms of any effects on the liver. And we did not see any liver enzyme increases that implied drug-induced toxicity. We did see some people, and this is just one of these rare and weird things, where some people, many people benefited in terms of sleep, and some people didn't. And those are some of the most common things that really kind of popped out of the study.
Excellent. And so how do these results impact clinical practice, and how do they translate into the real world setting in terms of, you yourself as a gynecologist, when you prescribe something like fezolinetant, how do you describe it to patients and also to colleagues? And how do you think this will transform things in clinical practice?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that have been that are transformative about fezolinetant. One thing is that there's a very fast onset of action. So if you're using like the antidepressants, you're using estrogens, it's typically more than, it takes a couple of weeks before people actually feel better. We see people feeling better within a few days, definitely within less than a week, which is transformative, because that had not been the case. That was true in the studies, and we definitely see it in clinical practice. The other thing, that we see is that we see people having better sleep. They have reduced hot flashes, and as a result, they have a better quality of life. It is ideal for people who cannot use estrogen, or who are estrogen adverse, whether it's because they're concerned about their family history or they're just not comfortable doing it. And so it's fantastic that we actually have an option that actually works, and it is highly effective. you have much, less, more than 50% reduction in hot flashes, and that patients are actually saying, I feel better.
What more could you ask for, right? That's the bottom line, that patients are feeling better.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And
And
that is the most important thing, that patients feel better.
absolutely. And so what's next for fezolinetant in terms of the trials that you are leading? What other what data can we expect in the coming months? And really, where do things go from here?
Yeah, so we are planning to do some observational studies, looking at women and people who have used like SSRIs or antidepressants and then switched over to Veozah, being able to see whether you see a better profile for those people. A couple other things that I didn't say that I want to say about fezolinetant is that unlike some of the hormonal treatments, women who are obese are not at risk for a blood clot. Mm. And this is really important. And what's even more important is that when the study was designed, it included people who were overweight and obese. And the reason that's important is because in many other studies that are designed to look at, whether a drug is effective, they exclude people who are overweight and obese.
Oh.
And another reason why that's really important is because when we look at burden, like who's most likely to have hot flashes,
right?
People who are overweight and obese, right? And so to exclude that
right.
is, it's just like a gap in care, right?
Yeah.
And so that we were very intentional in including that group. And we know from our data that group, the treatment is highly effective. The other group that I want to call out, because I think there's not, there's more people aware today than I would say 2 years ago, but there are real ethnic and racial differences in hot flashes and the burden. And in some subgroups of African Americans who cannot use estrogen, the SSRIs are not as effective. And so it was really important for us to have a study that was designed and that included a diverse patient population. Yeah. And the number or percentage of African American women included in the study was nearly similar to population density, which is a really important thing. And so the other finding in the study is that it was highly effective. We saw that women of color had more hot flashes, and when treated with the fezolinetant, their response was similar in terms of the number of hot flashes as their white counterparts. So it's like, really bridging that gap and reducing that disparity in terms of birth. In terms of, where do we go from here? We do want to understand a little bit more about Veozah or fezolinetant and its impact on sleep. And with that, we also will want to understand a little bit more in terms of whether if you improve sleep, do you also improve weight? Weight often a side effect of, or I should say, co-varies with sleep dysfunction. And there's a whole biology behind that. So if we can improve sleep, do we see improvement in some of the metabolic parameters that we know increase your risk for heart disease? One of my hopes is that we will do a study specifically targeting people with breast cancer or hormone responsive cancer, because there's an unmet need there to make sure that we prove and demonstrate that it's safe and that you can use it. There are other things that we intend to look at in terms of sleep quality, in terms of just observationally, looking at some of the other drugs such as gabapentin, SSRIs, compared to fezolinetant, and looking at some of the quality of life indicators.
Wonderful. So, Dr. Neal-Perry, in the end, what do you think would be, the overall take-home messages, both for physicians, investigators, and patients alike?
To me, when I step back and I look at the data, the take-home message is that we actually have an effective treatment for hot flashes that can be used as an alternative therapy, in terms of estrogen. So we have an effective alternative to estrogen for people who cannot use estrogen or who do not want to use estrogen, which, we haven't been there before now. So
Exactly. And that's big.
yeah, that is big.
That's big. Well, thank you very much once again, Dr. Neal-Perry, for being on the show today. I greatly appreciate your time. And thank you so much for sharing all of the important and groundbreaking results, I would say, for a drug like fezolinetant, and looking forward to seeing more of your work and on the drug and to see how it will truly come to impact patients' lives, which is most important.
Yeah, and very, very excited as well. So, all right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's the end of this episode of the X Talks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and see you next week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the X Talks Life Science Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find X Talks on social media, email podcast@xtalks.com, or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.